The power of trusting in God, a path to true strength and resilience. In the face of life's most difficult moments, when challenges seem insurmountable and struggles weigh heavily on our hearts, where do we turn for strength? As human beings, we often look to ourselves, our intellect, our resources, or the support of others to carry us through. Yet there is one source of power that transcends all: trusting in God. Trusting in God is not simply a belief or a theoretical concept. It is an active choice, a declaration that no matter the circumstances, we place our trust in the Creator, the Sustainer, the one who holds the universe in His hands. It is through this trust that we discover true strength and resilience, the kind that sustains us when everything else fails. The foundation of trust, Jesus' example in the wilderness. To understand the transformative power of trusting in God, we need to look no further than the life of Jesus Christ. Throughout His ministry, Jesus exemplified perfect trust in the Father, showing us what it looks like to rely on God completely, even in the most challenging of circumstances. One of the most profound moments where Jesus demonstrated this unwavering trust occurred during His time in the wilderness. After fasting for 40 days and nights, He was weak and vulnerable, both physically and emotionally. It was in this moment of deep fragility that the enemy, the devil, came to tempt Him. With hunger gnawing at His stomach, the devil suggested, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Matthew 4:3. What happened next was not merely a theological lesson. It was a testament to the power of trusting in God's provision. Jesus, in His weakened state, responded with a powerful declaration: "Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Matthew 4:4. In this moment, He chose not to rely on His own power or on material needs, but on the trust that God would provide for Him. This moment in the wilderness shows us a crucial truth. Even in our weakest, most vulnerable states, trusting in God is not about relying on our own strength. It is about knowing that God's Word is our true sustenance, that His plans for us are greater than any temporary comfort or immediate need. Jesus did not place His trust in what was visible or in what the world deemed necessary for survival, but in the truth that God would provide. Trust in the face of storms, a peace that surpasses understanding. Another powerful example of trusting in God comes from a time when Jesus was on a boat with His disciples. A great storm arose, and the wind and waves threatened to capsize the boat. In the midst of this life-threatening chaos, the disciples were terrified. They woke Jesus, who was peacefully sleeping, and said, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." Now here's where things take an unexpected turn. Instead of reacting in single command, "Quiet, be still," and immediately the storm ceased, and there was great calm. Then He turned to His disciples and asked, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Mark chapter 4, verses 39 through 40. In this miraculous moment, Jesus was teaching us that trusting in God is not merely about finding safety in the calm. It is about remaining at peace in the storm. Jesus had the ability to sleep through a storm that terrified seasoned fishermen because He trusted fully in God's sovereignty. His trust gave Him a peace that surpassed understanding, a peace that didn't depend on the external circumstances. This is the kind of trust that we are called to embrace. It's the kind of trust that allows us to sleep soundly in the midst of the storm, knowing that God has the power to calm the chaos. Even when everything around us seems to be falling apart, trusting in God gives us an inner peace that remains unshaken. It is this peace that strengthens us, renews us, and allows us to move forward with resilience. The strength of trust, from vulnerability to victory. Trusting in God is not about avoiding difficulties. It is about knowing that God will carry us through them. This trust, grounded in God's promises, empowers us to face challenges with courage, knowing that we do not face them alone. In our most vulnerable moments, when we feel as though our strength is running out, God is there to renew and restore us. Consider the story of David and Goliath. David, a young shepherd boy, faced a giant warrior who was terrifying even to the most experienced soldiers of Israel. Everyone saw Goliath as unbeatable, but David saw him differently. He didn't see an insurmountable obstacle, he saw an opportunity for God's power to be displayed. When he stood before Goliath, David said, "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 45. David's confidence didn't come from his own abilities. He was, after all, a mere boy untrained in battle. But he trusted in God, who had already delivered him from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear. This trust propelled him forward into battle. With a single stone, David defeated the giant, proving that trust in God gives us strength beyond our natural abilities. This same principle applies to our lives today. Whether we are facing financial struggles, health crises, relational issues, or career challenges, trusting in God allows us to confront these giants with the assurance that we are not alone. When we trust God, we recognize that it is not by our own strength, but by His power, that we will overcome. This is the strength that makes us resilient, that enables us to face any adversity and come out victorious. Trust in God, a constant process of surrender and faith. Trusting in God is not a one-time decision. It is an ongoing process that requires surrender, faith, and align with our own desires. It means acknowledging that we do not have all the answers, and that our understanding is limited. In John 11, we read the story of Lazarus, a dear friend of Jesus who fell ill and died. When Jesus arrived, he was met with the sorrow and grief of those around him. Many questioned why he had not come sooner to heal Lazarus. But Jesus, fully trusting in God's plan, responded by declaring, "This sickness will not end in death, but it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." John 11, verse 4. At first glance, it might seem incomprehensible why Jesus allowed his friend to die. Yet through his trust in God's perfect timing and plan, Jesus demonstrated that even in the midst of pain and loss, God's purposes would be revealed. When he called Lazarus from the tomb, he showed that God's plans are always greater than our understanding. Trusting in God means surrendering to His will, even when it doesn't make sense to us, and it is in this surrender that we find true strength and resilience. The reward of trust, a renewed strength for every battle. Ultimately, trusting in God is the foundation of true strength. When we place our trust in Him, we are not relying on our own power, but on His. And it is through this trust that we are renewed and strengthened, ready to face whatever challenges come our way. Isaiah 40 verse 31 promises, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." Trusting in God is not just about surviving. It is about thriving. It is about experiencing a strength that does not come from ourselves but from God. It is this strength that allows us to endure, to rise above our circumstances, and to face each new challenge with courage and resilience. In conclusion, trusting in God is not a passive act. It is a powerful declaration of faith that transforms our lives. It is through trust in God that we find true strength, strength that sustains us in the face of adversity, strength that gives us peace in the midst of chaos, and strength that empowers us to overcome any obstacle. Just as Jesus demonstrated through his life and ministry, trusting in God is the key to unlocking the resilience we need to navigate life's most difficult moments. And it is through this trust that we discover the power to live a life of purpose, peace, and unwavering strength. The transformative power of constant prayer, strength, resilience, and connection. In the fast-paced, chaotic world we live in today, it is easy to lose sight of the simple yet profoundly powerful act of prayer. We often think of prayer as a ritual or something to be done in times of need. Yet, Jesus taught us that prayer is far more than the face of life's most overwhelming challenges. Jesus, a model of persistent prayer. Throughout his earthly ministry, Jesus himself showed us the vital importance of prayer. His life was a constant dialogue with the Father, an example of how we should maintain that ongoing communication with God, especially when we are faced with trials and difficulties. One of the most compelling and striking demonstrations of Jesus' commitment to prayer occurred in the Garden of Gethsemane, just before his arrest and crucifixion. In the face of the unimaginable suffering that awaited him, Jesus retreated into the garden to pray. In Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 to 46, we see that Jesus took his disciples with him, but then withdrew a little further to pray on his own. His soul was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, and he prayed earnestly, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Matthew chapter 26, verse 39. Here, in one of the most profound moments of Jesus' life, we learn that prayer is not just a retreat from the world or a way to ask God for help. Prayer is the act of aligning our hearts with God's will, even when that will involves suffering or hardship. Jesus didn't just pray once. He prayed 3 times in the garden, each time surrendering himself to God's purpose and trusting in his plan, even as he struggled with the weight of what was about to happen. What makes this moment even more powerful is the contrast between Jesus' persistent prayer and the disciples' failure to stay awake and pray. As Jesus prayed with deep anguish, his disciples, who had promised to stay with him, fell asleep. This contrast is a stark reminder of how easy it is for us to fall into spiritual complacency, especially in times of difficulty. Prayer requires intentionality, persistence, and commitment. It is not just a momentary act, but a continuous flow of connection with the Father. The power of persistent prayer, strength in times of suffering. Jesus' commitment to prayer was not limited to moments of distress. Throughout his life, he often withdrew to quiet places to pray, seeking strength and renewal from his Father. It was during these quiet moments that Jesus found the strength to continue his mission. One such instance occurred before he selected his 12 disciples. In Luke chapter 6, verses 12 and 13, we read that Jesus spent the entire night in prayer before making this important decision. He didn't rush to choose his disciples based on his own wisdom or experience. Instead, he turned to his Father in prayer, seeking guidance and clarity. This example teaches us that prayer is not just for times of crisis, it is essential for every decision, every step we take in life. Persistent prayer was also a crucial part of Jesus' life when he faced the pressure of crowds and the demands of ministry. In Luke chapter 5, verse 16, it is said that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Despite the overwhelming needs of the people around him, Jesus made prayer a priority, finding strength and renewal in his moments of solitude with God. This practice of withdrawing to pray teaches us that prayer is essential for maintaining our spiritual health and emotional resilience, especially in the face of overwhelming pressure and demands. Prayer as the source of spiritual strength, finding peace amid the chaos. For those who are familiar with the Bible, it is clear that Jesus' constant prayer was not just about asking God for help. It was about staying connected to the Father in all things. This relationship with God was the foundation of his strength and resilience. Even in the face of the greatest adversity, Jesus never wavered from his commitment to prayer. One of the most incredible examples of this occurred when Jesus was in the midst of a violent storm with his disciples. In Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41, we read the story of how Jesus and his disciples were caught in a fierce storm while crossing the Sea of Galilee. As the storm raged, the disciples were terrified, believing they were going to drown. But where was Jesus? He was asleep in the boat. The disciples woke him in a panic, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Mark chapter 4, verses 38. Jesus, unfazed by the storm, simply got up, rebuked the wind and waves, and said, "Quiet, be still." And immediately the storm ceased. What's remarkable here is that, Despite the violent storm, Jesus remained peaceful. He was not afraid because he was in constant communion with the Father, trusting in God's sovereignty over the situation. This incident teaches us that prayer doesn't just help us ask for things, it provides the peace that allows us to remain calm in the midst of the storm. Jesus wasn't scared of the storm because he had already spent countless hours in prayer, building a deep relationship with the Father. His trust in God was so strong that the external chaos couldn't disturb his internal peace. When we make prayer a constant part of our lives, we experience that same peace. It is not a peace that depends on external circumstances, but a peace that comes from knowing that God is in control. Prayer enables us to maintain this peace, even in the most difficult of circumstances. The Lord's Prayer, a model for consistent, faithful communication with God. One of the most iconic teachings on prayer comes from the Lord's Prayer, which Jesus taught to his disciples in Matthew 6:9-13. In this prayer, Jesus provides us with a model of how to pray, both for our personal needs and for the needs of others. The Lord's Prayer begins with the words, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name." This opening is significant because it reminds us that prayer is not about bringing our laundry list of requests before God. Prayer begins with worship and adoration, acknowledging God's holiness and sovereignty. Prayer also includes a petition for God's kingdom to come and His will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. This shows that prayer is about aligning our will with God's will, seeking His guidance and direction in every area of our lives. Jesus doesn't just teach us to pray for our own needs, He teaches us to pray for the needs of others and for God's purposes to be fulfilled on earth. Finally, the Lord's Prayer ends with a request for forgiveness and protection. Jesus teaches us that prayer is not just about asking for things, it is about seeking spiritual nourishment and strength, forgiving others, and asking for God's protection from temptation and evil. By following this model of prayer, we can make prayer a consistent and integral part of our lives. It is a tool for personal transformation, a way to align our hearts with God's will, and a source of strength and resilience when faced with life's challenges. Praying without ceasing, a lifelong practice. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 17, Paul exhorts us to pray without ceasing. This instruction emphasizes that prayer should be a continual, ongoing practice, not just something we do in moments of crisis. Prayer is a conversation with God that should flow throughout our day, whether we are working, walking, or simply going about our daily lives. Praying without ceasing doesn't mean that we must always be on our knees or in a formal prayer posture. It means that we should cultivate an attitude of prayer, remaining constantly aware of God's presence in our lives. It means inviting God into every moment of our day, seeking His guidance, offering thanks for His blessings, and trusting Him with every decision we make. This continual prayer is a source of strength because it keeps us connected to God in all circumstances. Whether we are facing joy or sorrow, success or failure, we can pray to God with thanksgiving, knowing that He is always with us. The transformative power of prayer in our lives. When we commit to constant prayer, we invite God into every aspect of our lives. Prayer strengthens our relationship with God, helps us align our hearts with His will, and provides the resilience we need to face life's challenges. It is through prayer that we find peace in the storm, clarity in the midst of confusion, and strength when we feel weak. Just as Jesus demonstrated through His life, prayer is not just an occasional act, but a constant source of power that sustains us. It is through prayer that we tap into the resources of heaven, finding strength, wisdom, and peace to navigate the complexities of life. Prayer changes us, and in changing us, it equips us to face whatever challenges come our way with grace, confidence, and resilience. In conclusion, prayer is the lifeline that connects us to the source of all strength. It is through persistent, faithful prayer that we find the resilience to overcome any obstacle, the peace to navigate any storm, and the strength to endure whatever challenges life may throw at us. Just as Jesus showed us through His own life, prayer is not just a momentary act, but a continuous conversation with God. a conversation that transforms our hearts and empowers us to live a life of strength and purpose. The strength of serving others. Finding resilience through selflessness. In a world that often emphasizes individual achievement and personal success, the concept of serving others can seem counterintuitive to strength and resilience. We are taught from a young age to take care of ourselves, to succeed, and to compete for what we want. However, Jesus' life and teachings present a radically different perspective, one where true strength and resilience come not from standing above others, but from humbling ourselves and serving them. Jesus not only taught the power of serving others, but lived it out in powerful, life-changing ways that continue to inspire us today. Jesus washing his disciples' feet, a defining act of service. One of the most powerful and shocking examples of service in the Bible is found in the Gospel of John, where Jesus performs the humble act of washing his disciples' feet. In John 13, 1-17, we read that during the Last Supper before his arrest, Jesus, the Lord and teacher, took a basin and a towel and began to wash the feet of his disciples, an act typically reserved for the lowest servant in the household. The scene is almost unbelievable. The disciples who had followed Jesus for years were probably expecting him to make a grand gesture, to deliver a final sermon, or to assert his authority. Instead, he does something that shocks them to their core. Peter in particular is so taken aback that he initially refuses to allow Jesus to wash his feet. He asks, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" John 13:6. Jesus responds, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." John 13:8. Only after this response does Peter finally submit to being washed, saying, "Then, Lord, not just my feet but my hands and my head as well." John 13:9. In this powerful moment, Jesus demonstrates that true greatness is not about being served, but about serving others. He teaches his disciples and us that service is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. The act of washing feet, a task so humble and lowly, illustrates that the greatest among us is the one who serves the most. Jesus' example shows that humility and service are not contrary to strength, but are its very foundation. Serving others strengthens us spiritually and emotionally, because it shifts our focus away from our own needs and desires, putting the needs of others first.
The paradox of strength in serving. Power through humility.
At first glance, the idea that serving others builds strength may seem contradictory. After all, doesn't strength come from achieving thinking? Through his actions, he demonstrated that true strength does not lie in asserting control but in surrendering ourselves for the sake of others. Consider the paradox of the cross. Jesus, the Son of God, who had the power to command legions of angels, chose to serve humanity by giving up his life on the cross. He allowed himself to be humiliated, beaten, and nailed to a tree, all for the sake of others. In doing so, he showed us that true power is not about force, but about love and sacrifice. Through his death, he brought life. Through his humility, he demonstrated unparalleled strength. This paradox is not just theoretical, it is something that we can experience in our own lives. Serving others doesn't deplete us, it fills us. It is through acts of service that we connect with the true purpose of our lives, to love and care for those around us. When we serve, we often find ourselves strengthened, emotionally uplifted, and spiritually renewed. It is in the act of serving others that we discover our true purpose and find the resilience we need to navigate life's challenges. The power of service in times of adversity. Serving others does not only build strength in peaceful moments, it also provides resilience in the face of adversity. When life is hard, when we are going through personal struggles, one of the best ways to regain our strength is by turning our focus outward. It's easy to become consumed by our own pain, to fall into the trap of self-pity or hopelessness. However, Jesus taught us that even in our darkest hours, serving others can bring us the strength and perspective we need to keep going. A powerful example of this is seen in the life of the Apostle Paul. Paul faced incredible hardship, shipwrecks, beatings, imprisonment, and yet he remained focused on serving others. In 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4, Paul writes, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." Paul understood that the comfort and strength he received from God were not just for his own benefit, but for the purpose of helping others. In the midst of his own suffering, Paul found purpose and strength by focusing on how he could serve those around him. Similarly, Jesus' own life was filled with moments of immense pain and sorrow, yet he never lost sight of his mission to serve others. Even when he was crucified, he continued to serve by praying for his executioners, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke 23:34. Despite his immense suffering, he chose to serve those who were responsible for his pain. This ultimate act of service in the face of adversity shows us that serving others is not only an expression of love, but also a path to resilience. When we serve, we rise above our circumstances and find strength beyond our own. Serving others, a source of renewal and strength. Service is not just about meeting the physical needs of others. It is also a source of emotional and spiritual renewal. Many of us have experienced the satisfaction and fulfillment that come from helping someone in need. This sense of fulfillment is not simply the result of doing something good. It is the outcome of participating in God's work in the world. Serving others allows us to align our hearts with God's purposes, and in doing so, we are strengthened. Jesus modeled this beautifully when he fed the 5,000. In John chapter 6, verses 1 to 13, we read the story of how Jesus and his disciples were faced with a crowd of thousands who were hungry. Rather than sending them away or ignoring their needs, Jesus took a small offering, 5 loaves and 2 fish, and multiplied it to feed the entire crowd. This act of service showed not only his compassion, but also his trust in God to provide. The result? Not only were the physical needs of the people met, but the disciples were also renewed in their faith as they saw the power of service in action. This story serves as a reminder that when we serve others, we often find that our own needs are met as well. Service becomes a two-way street. We bless others, but in the process, we are blessed. Serving others renews our hearts, minds, and spirits. It brings us closer to God and strengthens us to face whatever challenges lie ahead. The long-term power of service, building a legacy of strength. Serving others also has long-term effects on our strength and resilience. When we make service a habit, it becomes part of who we are. Over time, this practice of selflessness builds a foundation of strength that can withstand the challenges of life. Jesus taught that true greatness is found in serving, and this principle is not just about individual acts of kindness. It is about cultivating a lifelong attitude of service. In Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 to 46, Jesus teaches us that serving others is integral to our relationship with Him. He says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in." Matthew chapter 25, verse 35. This passage reminds us that serving others is not just about doing good deeds. It is about living out the love of Christ in a way that changes the world around us. It is through service that we build a legacy of love, compassion, and resilience that impacts generations to come. Conclusion: strength in service. The call to serve others is not just a command. It is a pathway to strength, resilience, and true greatness. Through Jesus' life and teachings, we learn that serving others is not a sign of weakness, but a powerful demonstration of love, humility, and strength. In moments of difficulty, service becomes a means of finding renewal, hope, and perspective. God is working in and through us. Service is not just an act, it is a way of life that builds strength, fosters community, and changes the world. As we follow Jesus' example and make service a central part of our lives, we discover the deep joy and fulfillment that comes from living for others. Serving others allows us to connect with the heart of God and empowers us to face every challenge with a renewed sense of purpose and strength. In this way, service is not just an outward action, it is a source of inner transformation, a key to lasting resilience, and a powerful demonstration of God's love in the world. Faith in difficult times, the pillar of strength and resilience. In life, there are moments when everything seems to be falling apart. When challenges pile on top of each other, when the weight of the world feels unbearable, and when the path ahead is shrouded in darkness, where do we find the strength to persevere? In these moments of uncertainty, it is our faith that becomes our anchor. Faith is the force that holds us steady, the source of resilience that propels us through adversity, and the pillar that sustains us when we feel like giving up. Throughout history, faith has been a defining characteristic of those who have overcome the greatest trials. From the ancient stories of prophets and saints to modern-day examples of courage and determination, faith has proven to be the one thing that can keep us going when everything else fails. But what does it truly mean to have faith in difficult times? How can we cultivate this kind of unshakable faith that allows us to face life's storms with confidence and hope? The power of faith, Jesus' example in the storm. One of the most powerful examples of faith in the Bible comes from a dramatic moment in the life of Jesus and his disciples. In Matthew 8:23-27, we read about a time when Jesus and his disciples were caught in a violent storm while crossing the Sea of Galilee. As the waves crashed over the boat and the winds howled, the disciples, experienced fishermen, were terrified. They thought the boat was about to sink, and in desperation, they woke Jesus, who was peacefully asleep in the stern of the boat. "Lord, save us, we're going to drown," they cried out. Jesus, in the face of this terrifying storm, responded with incredible calmness. He stood up, rebuked the winds and the waves, and immediately the storm ceased. The sea became calm. Then Jesus turned to his disciples and asked, "Why are you so afraid, you of little faith?" Matthew 8:26. This moment is not just a miraculous demonstration of Jesus' power over nature. It is a profound lesson on the power of faith. The disciples, in the face of a storm that seemed life-threatening, lost their faith. They were consumed by fear and doubt, and in doing so, they forgot the very essence of what it meant to trust in Jesus. Jesus, on the other hand, remained calm and confident, knowing that his Father was in control. His faith in God's sovereignty over all things gave him peace, even in the midst of the storm. For us, the storm can symbolize any of life's trials: financial struggles, health problems, relational issues, or emotional battles. When faced with these challenges, it is easy to feel overwhelmed and fearful. But faith teaches us that even in the most turbulent moments, God is with us, and his power can calm the storms in our lives. When we place our faith in God, we find peace that transcends our circumstances. Faith as trust in God's timing. Faith is not just about believing that God can change our circumstances, it's also about trusting his timing. In John chapter 11, we find one of the most profound stories about faith in the face of loss: the death and resurrection of Lazarus. Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha, was a dear friend of Jesus. When he fell ill, his sisters sent word to Jesus, hoping that he would come quickly and heal him. But Jesus, in a surprising twist, delayed his visit. By the time Jesus arrived, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Mary and Martha were devastated and confused. They had believed that Jesus, being the Son of God, could have healed their brother and prevented his death. When Jesus finally arrived, Martha went out to meet him and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." John chapter 11, verse 21. Despite the pain and confusion, Jesus responded with words that spoke to the deeper reality of faith. "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die." John chapter 11, 25-26. Jesus was not late. His timing was perfect. He allowed Lazarus to die so that he could demonstrate God's power in an even greater way. When he called Lazarus to come out of the tomb, he showed everyone that God's timing is always right, even when we don't understand it. Lazarus was raised from the dead, and the faith of those who witnessed the miracle was deepened. This story teaches us an important lesson about faith in difficult times. Faith means trusting in God's timing, even when we can't see the end of the story. We may not always understand why things happen when they do, but we can trust that God is working in ways we can't see. Just as Jesus had a greater purpose in delaying his arrival to Lazarus's tomb, God has a greater plan for us, even when we are in the midst of pain or confusion. Faith in action, the woman with the hemorrhage. Another powerful story that illustrates faith in action comes from the Gospel of Mark, where a woman who had been suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years reaches out to Jesus for healing. In Mark 5:25 through 34, we learn that this woman had spent all her money on doctors, yet none of them could heal her. She was desperate, broken, and isolated by her condition. But when she heard about Jesus, she believed that if she could just touch his cloak, she would be healed. Through the people reached out and touched the hem of his garment. Immediately she felt her body healed. Jesus, knowing that power had gone out from him, turned to ask, "Who touched my clothes?" Mark chapter 5, verse 30. The woman, trembling, fell at his feet and confessed. Jesus responded to her with compassion and encouragement. "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Mark chapter 5, verse 34. This woman's story teaches us that faith is not just passive belief, but active trust. She didn't just hope for healing, she acted on her faith. She believed that Jesus had the power to heal her, and she pursued him with everything she had. In the same way, faith calls us to act in trust, even when our circumstances seem impossible. When we step out in faith, trusting that God will act on our behalf, we open ourselves to receive his grace and strength. The role of faith in overcoming fear. Faith is also the antidote to fear. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, Paul writes, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." Fear is one of the greatest obstacles to faith. When we are afraid, we doubt God's goodness and power. We focus on our problems instead of trusting in God's ability to overcome them. But when we choose faith over fear, we discover a power that enables us to face even the most daunting challenges with courage. Faith allows us to walk through the valley of the shadow of death without fear, knowing that God is with us. It gives us the courage to confront our greatest fears and emerge stronger on the other side. In the Bible, we see numerous examples of individuals who overcame fear through faith. One such example is the story of David and Goliath. David, a young shepherd boy, faced the giant Goliath, who had terrorized the Israelite army. Everyone else was paralyzed by fear, but David faced the giant with faith in God. He said to Goliath, "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 45. David's faith in God's power gave him the strength to defeat Goliath, not with a sword but with a single stone. Faith in difficult times, finding peace and hope. In times of hardship, faith doesn't just give us strength, it gives us peace. Jesus promised his disciples, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." John chapter 14, verse 27. Faith in God's sovereignty brings a peace that surpasses understanding. It allows us to rest in the assurance that God is in control, even when our circumstances seem overwhelming. This peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of God in the midst of them. It is the peace that allows us to endure trials without losing hope, to face struggles with joy, and to trust in God's plan even when we don't understand it. Conclusion, faith is the foundation of resilience in difficult times. It is the power that sustains us when everything else seems to fail. Jesus' life and teachings show us that faith in God's power, trust in his timing, and the willingness to act on our belief can help us overcome any obstacle. Whether we are in the midst of a storm, facing loss, or grappling with fear, faith is the key to finding strength, peace, and hope. Faith is not just a passive belief in God. It is an active, living force that propels us forward, even in the most difficult of circumstances. Just as Jesus calmed the storm, healed the sick, and raised the dead, our faith in Him allows us to face life's greatest challenges with confidence, knowing that God is always with us and that His plans for us are good. In times of difficulty, may we choose faith over fear, trust in God's perfect timing, and find strength in His presence. And as we do, we will discover that faith is the key to enduring life's storms and emerging stronger, more resilient, and more hopeful than ever before. Forgiving wholeheartedly, the key to strength, peace, and resilience. In a world filled with conflict, pain, and betrayal, forgiveness may seem like an impossible feat. The wounds inflicted by others can run deep, and the emotional scars they leave behind can make it hard to move forward. Yet, in the teachings of Jesus, forgiveness is not just a recommendation, but a command. Jesus taught that true strength and resilience come not from holding on to hurt or seeking revenge, but from letting go and choosing forgiveness. It is through forgiveness that we find freedom, healing, and the ability to rise above the pain. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. It is not about forgetting the wrongs that have been done to us, nor is it about excusing harmful behavior. Rather, it is a powerful act of releasing the hold that resentment and bitterness have over our hearts. When we forgive wholeheartedly, we free ourselves from the chains of anger and hurt, and we open the door to healing, peace, and renewed strength. The radical forgiveness of Jesus, a transformative example. One of the most powerful examples of forgiveness comes from the life of Jesus. As He hung on the cross, suffering the most excruciating pain and humiliation, He did not call down curses upon those who had wronged Him. Instead, He prayed for them. In Luke chapter 23, verse 34, Jesus, in the midst of His agony, uttered the words, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." This moment is nothing short of radical. Jesus was unjustly arrested, beaten, and sentenced to death on a cross. He endured the most cruel and painful execution imaginable, yet His response was not one of anger or bitterness. Instead, He chose to forgive those who were responsible for His suffering. He didn't wait for them to apologize or express regret. He forgave them freely, extending grace even to those who did not deserve it. This act of forgiveness is the cornerstone of Christian faith. Jesus did not forgive because the people who crucified Him asked for forgiveness or even understood the gravity of their actions. He forgave because forgiveness is an essential part of God's nature and a fundamental principle of His kingdom. Through Jesus' example, we learn that forgiving wholeheartedly is not a sign of weakness, but of immense spiritual strength. It takes great courage and resilience to forgive, especially when we have been deeply hurt. Jesus showed us that forgiveness is the path to true freedom and peace. The power of forgiveness in healing emotional wounds. Forgiveness is not only a powerful spiritual principle, but it is also essential for emotional and mental healing. Holding on to anger, resentment, and bitterness can poison our hearts and minds. It can eat away at our peace, robbing us of the joy and serenity that God desires for us. When we refuse to forgive, we allow the wounds of the past to define us, locking us in a cycle of pain and bitterness. Consider the story of a man named David, who had been deeply hurt by a close friend. The betrayal cut deeply, and for years, David held on to his anger. He often replayed the hurt in his mind, nursing his resentment and allowing it to fester. He thought that by holding on to his anger, he was somehow punishing the person who wronged him. But in reality, he was only hurting himself. One day, David realized that his anger had taken root in his heart and that it was affecting his relationships with others, his peace of mind, and even his health. He was exhausted by the weight of his unforgiveness. He knew that in order to move forward and heal, he needed to let go of his bitterness. With great difficulty, he made the choice to forgive. As David forgave, something incredible happened. The burden of anger and resentment that had weighed him down for so long was lifted. He experienced a deep sense of peace and freedom that he hadn't felt in years. The act of forgiveness didn't change the past, but it changed David's present and future. He was no longer held captive by the pain of his past, and he was able to walk forward with a renewed sense of hope and strength. This story illustrates the profound power of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not about letting the other person off the hook, but about freeing yourself from the chains of the past. When we forgive wholeheartedly, we break free from the emotional prison that holds us captive, and we open the door to healing, peace, and emotional well-being. The role of forgiveness in restoring relationships. Forgiveness also plays a crucial role in restoring and rebuilding relationships. When trust is broken, when betrayal occurs, and when wounds are inflicted, it can feel impossible to rebuild the connection. Yet, forgiveness is the first step toward reconciliation. Without forgiveness, relationships remain fractured and distant.
Forgiveness.
He asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Jesus responded, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times." Matthew chapter 18, verse 22. Jesus' answer wasn't meant to suggest a literal number of times, but rather to emphasize the importance of unlimited forgiveness. Forgiveness should not be limited or calculated. It should flow freely and without end. This principle of radical forgiveness is vital in our relationships. When we forgive, we open the door for healing and restoration. It doesn't mean that trust is immediately restored or that the wrong is excused, but it does mean that we are choosing to release the hurt and move forward. In forgiving others, we mirror the love and grace that God has shown us. Consider the example of Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and imprisoned for many years. Yet, when the time came for him to confront his brothers, he chose forgiveness. In Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph said to them, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph's forgiveness didn't erase the pain of his past, but it allowed him to move beyond the hurt and embrace the opportunity for reconciliation. His willingness to forgive restored his relationship with his brothers and set the stage for a united family. Forgiveness and the freedom to live fully. One of the most beautiful aspects of forgiveness is the freedom it brings. When we forgive, we release the grip that the past has on us. We no longer allow the actions of others to dictate our present or future. Forgiveness frees us to live fully in the present, unburdened by past wrongs. Imagine a woman named Sarah who had been deeply hurt by her childhood experiences. Her father had abandoned her family, and the pain of that abandonment shaped her entire life. For years, she carried the weight of anger and bitterness, believing that she would never be able to move on from the hurt. Over time, Sarah realized that her inability to forgive her father was preventing her from experiencing true joy and peace. She made the difficult decision to forgive him, not because he deserved it, but because she deserved the freedom that forgiveness brings. Through forgiveness, Sarah was able to release the grip that the past had on her, and she found the peace and joy that had eluded her for so long. Forgiveness allows us to let go of the past and embrace the fullness of life that God has for us. It enables us to live in the present, free from the bitterness and anger that can hold us back. When we forgive, we open ourselves to the love, joy, and peace that God desires for us. The challenge and reward of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not easy. It is one of the most challenging aspects of the Christian life, especially when the wounds are deep and the pain is raw. Forgiving someone who has hurt us profoundly feels like an impossible task, but Jesus never promised that forgiveness would be easy. He simply commanded us to forgive just as he forgave us. In Ephesians 4:32, Paul writes, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." The key to forgiveness is not about the other person's actions, but about what forgiveness does for us. When we forgive, we follow Jesus' example, and in doing so, we experience the freedom, peace, and strength that only forgiveness can bring. Forgiveness is an act of obedience that leads to healing, freedom, and spiritual growth. Conclusion: the healing power of forgiveness. Forgiving wholeheartedly is not just an act of kindness, it is a path to true strength and resilience. Through forgiveness, we find emotional healing, restored relationships, and the freedom to live fully. Jesus' example of forgiveness on the cross shows us that forgiveness is a powerful act that not only brings freedom to the one who forgives, but also transforms the world around us. In the face of hurt, betrayal, and pain, we can choose to forgive. It is through this act of radical forgiveness that we discover the greatest strength, the strength to release the past, to heal, and to move forward with peace and resilience. Forgiveness may be the most challenging choice we make, but it is also the most powerful. Through forgiveness, we reflect the heart of God and become vessels of His love and grace in the world. Forgiveness is not just an action, it is a way of life. It is the key to unlocking true freedom, peace, and strength. May we choose to forgive wholeheartedly, knowing that in doing so, we release ourselves from the chains of the past and step into the fullness of life that God has prepared for us.